going on in the divine levels. Okay, now chapter 283, Hinilachin Kol Zeh, starts now the other direction. This was all air going up. Now we're going to air coming down. Achid Kol Zeh, after all this is said and done.
Can I just ask? Can you just sum up the difference between if the is just not happy with anywhere else, or he doesn't have his yashros?
But where does it say it's not happy with anyone else? I never saw that.
We gave Mashal before
No. The Eir by nature is no mitzvahs of its own. So all it is the source. So it doesn't find any place for itself when it's
not
outside.
Because the chant is good. I'm saying like when someone comes to the throne because of the chant is good. So there.
Someone comes from the chant is good.
Yeah. So there, it's not that he doesn't find his yashros anywhere else. He just.
Can we conclude from that someone doesn't become from because the challenge is bad?
No, but it becomes true. Good morning. Okay, it's not his yashros. It's not that.
No. Let's not talk about. It doesn't speak about. It says the air outside of its source, by its nature, because it's an ayin, is not at peace with itself. It's not b'sashvus. It doesn't find its place for itself. Finzach nishkenot. That's what's the lashon.
Right.
It doesn't find its own place, and that's why two things happen. It's constantly restless, and therefore searching its source. It's pushing through searching its source. And secondly, when it reaches the source, whatever way, through its will and desire, or actually, its thirst was satisfied, and therefore it's now in its home. It's home. So but with Atzmus it has a mitzvah. With the source it has a mitzvah. That's the bottom line. Eir Atzmi, the Atzmi part of Eir has nothing to do with all that. The Atzmi part of Eir wants to be in the source just because the Eir is bottled completely to the market. It has nothing to do actually with its own interests. In a sense, the ayin is its own interest, not self-interest like in a yesh, but it's because it doesn't have anything of its own without the source. The second level, it makes no difference. It's just the ayin is just completely bottled to the source, and therefore, like he says, it's margish, the part of atzmus that's higher than being a mocker. Remember, he said that somewhere earlier, and that's why it. Huh? What's it?
Rabbi.
He says somewhere a lashon. Do you remember the lashon where it says that the eir is margish, that it's a mile from being a mocker? Somewhere he said that. Oh, Yev Shleimer Hefresh. The end of Perek Reish Pei Aleph may help as well. Reish Pei, I'm sorry. The end of chapter Reish Pei, Tov Kuf Samaches. Just those three lines. Yev Shleimer Hefresh was that the bit la kesel l'gaba atzma she'ena begeder moker. A bit l'chachmu l'gaba mekeide. V'aynu shenirgish by etzim shum moker e'er v'ayzehu by bitl ze'in einz also. V'gam avusham she'en zeh shum b'chinas spalos man. Okay. So you see here that, in a sense, what I said earlier, the eir, that's higher level in eir, senses that atzmus and moyer is not a moker. So there's no mitzvahs with atzmus. I'm just, even though he uses this legabe keser and chochma, but the same thing you could say within keser bedakus. Everything is that. You could say also in keser that when you say eir atzmi, the atzmi in eir senses how it's not even a moker. And eir, as it's l'ravis semene, to satisfy to quench its thirst, or because it doesn't find a place, is yet because it is its market. So with its market, it feels at peace. Bottom line is the higher level of eir, bittul. You can ask the question the other way around. Why is the higher level of eir interested in going back to the source? It doesn't get any peace of being in its source, because in the source it's just as distant as when it's outside of its source.
So it doesn't.
You could ask such a shayla.
It doesn't say.
But the answer is because ultimately it's eir, so eir is bottled to the mar. Instead, what you could say, I just asked a question.
Yeah.
The lower level of Eir, you understand why it's constantly restless and flickering and searching its source. Because that's its home, that's its source. And it wants to be where it's at home. It doesn't want to be where it doesn't find any place for itself outside of that. But the higher level of the Atzmi and Eir, even in its source, it doesn't exist. So why does it want to go there? It's being outside the source and in the source is the same thing. It's equidistant from Atzmos. As a shayla. The answer has to be is because it's fort Eir. It's not. And just like the lower levels of Eir have the higher level has the lower level.
Good.
In other words, it is Eir, and therefore in Tzad Eir it does have. In other words, even the higher Atzmi part still has the part that also it's fort Eir. It's also Mein Hamoyer. That's what you have to say. It's fort Eir. That even that part still has something that it gets when it's in the source because it's for only connect. It's only a channel.
By the
for
way,
the
that
source.
part doesn't want to go there. That part is there.
Okay, you could say that. Yeah, it's there. That's good. That's where it fits. It's there. It doesn't need to want to go. It's there. It's just the etzem. In other words, Eir is Moyer. The Eir is Moyer. It does this. There's nothing else but Moyer.
That Perek explains Etzem.
Okay, fine. You could say that. That may be a good explanation for it. So Eir, that level of Eir is just Moyer. The second level, the Eir, is that it wants to go. It has no place of its own. So with Atzmos, it's there. So that's the twist here. Then the higher level, that even with the source, it's not there. That itself is what Eir. That's what Eir feels. It feels that's completely nothing. It's not only completely nothing. It's completely nothing. That's what means Eir b'teicha moer. It's a good point. Yeah. In other words, bedakus, you could say it's like the difference between a foreign thing wanting to go into its source. So it exists, like Shargi B'tira, like a flame. You know what I think is maybe another point in this is, remember he said that Shargi B'tira is a bittul, it's not the muhuse klal, so it's higher. The flame and the sunlight are not the same muhus. So its bittul is very deep. Whereas let's say Chochmah is in its same muhus, but it's not as profound bittul. Maybe the higher level of Eir is like it's the Eir goes into the not mahus, understand? But not like a flame where the flame still exists. It's Eis and Gansen. It's all completely bottled to the Ein mahus. You understand what I'm saying? Chochmah is the same mahus. Flame, which is the lower level of Keser, is a different mahus, but it's still a flame. It's still Metzias. And then there's a level that goes into the higher level of not mahus. It's not even a flame anymore. Am I making sense? Like the student with the Chacham. So with his teacher there, he has no presence.
You are and you're not.
Right, right. Hold on. But
then you're not making sense. Your mitzvah is built to
it. Anyway, I thought I made sense for me.
Yeah, 100%.
It's the black and the bound part.
Yeah, it has to be learned quite a few times. What can I say? So Perek Reish Bei Gimel. Did you get Reish Bei Gimel, Reish Bei Dal as well?
Yeah. Well, you did it.
It wasn't so bad. It was more Vedic.
I know it's a Vedic, but there's
Reish Bei Dal is
maybe that's why I don't get it.
One second. But Reish Bei Dal was pretty clear. Like you have to go to the opposite.
Yeah, okay.
But
let's just sum up Reish Bei Gimel.
You missed it here with the Gretving in relationships was big stuff. And we said Simon will come Sunday. He's
We
going
said
to
the whole week,
expound on it. Waiting for
Okay, Reish Bei Gimel goes like this. I'm just going to read the beginning of it. Okay, so he said that in his college, Be'er, if an album is called Se'er. Okay. The bottom line, Eir is Ayin, and doesn't have his Yashvus, and we're not that level yet.
Is our neshama that level?
I'm going to say that now. After all this, we see that the Eir comes down, descends, and becomes Eir HaMeir. It becomes a light that radiates. In other words, it's not like darkness. We don't have darkness. We have the energy comes down and creates existence. And that's through the Keli within them. Nechaz ha'er, through the Kelim within the Eir, it grasps Nechaz ha'er, and it becomes a Metzias. Remember, Eir itself, that's what he says. He's going to say that, he's going to explain that. that the keli and the air and the air and the keli, that's how they meet. That's the mamutzi. It says it clear, the relationship. That's clear. It's beautiful.
It means
How they
the feminine side, the feminine side.
Yeah, you're stealing Simon's job.
I'm sorry.
No. First of all, there's always more dimensions to it. And secondly, did you start applying it is what I wanted.
That's a whole different, they talk about Veda, it's a whole different story. This is the scholar of Veda.
So basically, the kelim shebehem was that their kelim shebehem. So remember, we said that Eir is ayin and not mitzias. So then, how is it coming to the world of mitzias? The answer is that's through the kelim. The kelim do that. The kelim cause them to come down. Whenever he says klal, this is a rule. This is a klal. This is a fundamental klal. Every divine energy, every divine light. It's a reflection of Elikus. A divine reflection. That extends, expresses from the Mekere Ha'atzmi, from the essential source. That's the rule. Remember, before he said the rule, Eir by nature, he's spelling it out now with Elikus. Eir by nature is a channel for its source. What does it mean, the Klal and Eir Eliki? Everything is a reflection of its source. And since it comes from its source, it always, consistent, it is ascending to the Ayin Eliki. It's always grasping for, always reaching toward the Ayin Eliki, the Ayin, the Bittul. In its source, in a Bittul Tmidi B'li Hefsek. And then, of course, you see the example. Like we see Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. What's a Ner? A Ner is always reaching upward. Always. And brings the pasuk, Ruach HaAdam Hu'el L'mayla. Spirit of man ascends on high. It says, Ruach HaBehema Yiredis L'mata. Friedrich Rebbe says, a behema never saw heaven. It's not just a physiological thing, because a behema doesn't have a nefesh, a soul, that aspires to the source. It was put here for a purpose. Behema is doing what God wants it to do. But it looks down on the grass, on the ground all the time. And every animal is like that. So, because the nature of an animal is not to reach upward. And Neshama is like a flame reaches upward. You know the great story with Tzemach Tzedek when he was a child playing on a ladder. So he was afraid to climb to the top of the ladder. All the other children he was not afraid, he climbed all the way to the top. All the other children were afraid to climb. They asked him, the Alter Rebbe asked Tzemach Tzedek as a child, why? He says, because when they climbed, so they saw how low, kept looking down. So they saw how high they were afraid to climb higher. I kept looking up, so I saw how low I was, I climbed higher.
You heard that Shem Tzemach Tzedek? I heard it
The Rebbe.
It's not with the Rebbe, it's with Tzemach Tzedek. Yeah, I researched it.
So you also heard that it was the Rebbe also?
They said it around, but it's not same first name. Same Rebbetzon's name.
And that?
Anyway, the point is, it's a beautiful example because I use it all the time. It's a very good way to explain the two. We have two options in our life. Do you look down or do you look up in your life? It's interesting. Whenever you blow your nose, you blow yours. Is that like a plan? Huh? So it's like a yawn.
He doesn't want to make too much noise, so he tags along.
His colleagues.
His colleagues. Era kol bats musa.
Yeah. So anyway, so the point is that it's a great way to explain the two voices inside of us. You know, one, you look down. You look like I always say, when you're with people that are less accomplished than you, it doesn't usually motivate you very much. Because you say, look how much I've done compared to them. When you look up and you see people who accomplish more, it's in yourself from Tabach Chachma, it elevates you. So we really have two choices. Nefesh Elikis, the Adam within us, is looking up. The spirit goes up like the flame. So it's transcendent by nature. It aspires. It's constantly restless. The part of us that's like the couch potato, it's zufrieden mit sich. The Lashon Shleim is that. The part that it's an inside joke, is the part that's satisfied, and this is the opposite of Eir. It's the Yesh. So it's just stationary. It's sedentary is the word, right? But so basically that's what he says. So the klal of Eir Eliki, the reason he says a klal, I think it's because it's almost like a rule. If it's Eir Eliki, it's going up. If you see something that's not going up, you know it's not Eir
Does it have to
Eliki.
be Eliki? Eir.
Because he was talking obviously in the Neshama, he's already talking good. But there's but a human being going up is inside the Lakus, it's not Stam Eir. Let's put it this way, people who are restless souls, it doesn't have to be even Jewish. People who are restless souls and are aspiring, is because their soul is awake and wants more. People who are very self-satisfied, animal bliss, and they're just pasturing in their, in their pastures. Yeah,
A good word.
they're pasturing in their
It's very
fields.
important to pass a little bit.
Huh?
It's very important to pass.
No,
Yeah.
that's the right one.
No, like the Rabbi said, no, but there's an abyssal. After a little Aveda, then you can passion.
It's a Veda, Mol is a Veda.
Okay, good. I think we
If
need
it's
somebody.
elevated, then
Maybe
you.
Ramon does it. Let him become back.
Okay.
This is flying. This guy's flying.
The chenu gamba neshama, kameshu lamata. Now, this is a very powerful piece because this you can identify. You see, till now you're talking about Eir, which it's an abstract concept. He's bringing it here into Aveda Dikaesis. How does it play itself out? Bottom line is, all the levels of Eir that we just said are all in the Neir Hashem that you have. Shagir Betira, the Chaneir. So everything is in your soul. If you let your soul be active,
Is he going to bring these three madeiks you spoke about in the Kalim?
He's definitely going to speak about in Kalim. Not the three in Eir, he's going to speak about levels in Kalim for sure.
Are they endlich to the, that's something that
No, I don't think they're Enlich. I didn't remember, I think it's
Okay.
more,
We'll see.
but the three levels of Eir are going to play themselves out, how the Kalim can't deal with them. There's going to be a real battle going on. That's how Teyu fits in. Because Teyu is where the Keli doesn't, it's going to be four different ways how Eir and Keli can't interact with each other. Talk about relationships. He's going to push and say four models of how, of lack of four ways where there's no relationship and how, where the Eir is too strong or the Keli is too strong, and when this level of Eir is too strong, it's an unbelievable piece. I've been looking around for the Maimorim that speak about it. I don't think it exists. The Rebbe Rashab here, Mispashet as the next few Maimorim, very rare you're going to find anywhere. In a Maimorim, maybe by Chassidish Fabrengen, but by Maimer, a formal Maimer, he speaks four ways that the Eir and Keli don't get along with
Did
each
you
other.
say it's a Yesh Loma? I mean, he says it's a Kiddush, or?
It looks like it. It looks like it. It looks like it. I mean, I read it more to understand the flow, but I didn't read it to read it a few more times. But it looks like it. I mean, it's collected from places. It's not like it's. But what he's doing is taking Eir and Keli that says all over in Chassidus and really that's why it's called the Rambam of Chassidus. It brings it all together in one place, so automatically all kinds of new chedushim emerge. Here you learn one mimer this thing, and you learn another mimer that thing. If you notice, I'm sure you really realize that. With learning all the mimer you've ever learned, it doesn't come close because here the thoroughness, he brings it all together and all the qualifications. You learn a mimer, one mimer, and I learned recently. I just learned a few days ago another mimer with somebody. I was like, you feel like it's like after you're lifting up 100 tons. You have to lift 100 pounds, you feel like it's a kind of a relief. It was easy. I mean, it wasn't easy. Maimer wasn't easy, but you don't have to contain hundreds of pages and try to understand the flow. You one Maimer, beginning and then said a relief. There's no hemshech. It's not like the next Maimer starts now, I mean, it's interesting. It's Mededik. But what he does here, he brings all the Maimarim together. So therefore, the whole thing becomes much more complex, but also much more thorough, because every nuance, even these three levels of Eir, I'm looking right now, I find them in different places. You don't find them in one place. You find sometimes one mimer says it this way, and this. Here, he brings them together, so it's three levels. There's four levels. You see, he brings from V'kacha, and you can see that he's doing that. He brings V'kacha, then he brings the second period. You can see he's bringing them from places. You can sense it. And he's just collecting it together and showing what's what, which is unbelievable. It's like answering reconciling a lot of the contradictions, I guess, in many places. What can I say? This Hemshech is beyond. I don't know, just like endless. But when you start seeing a pattern emerge, it's very powerful. The key thing is to stick to just, even if you write down for yourself, just write down for yourself one page, like a little flow. It'll be tremendous, I'm telling you. Just a few basic things, ayin, bittul, interface. And then the details are all like, they flow from that. It's like one main artery that a lot of details flow from. I mean, you got to go over a lot of times to really, but thank God the Kitsurim and the ends of every Maimer is very powerful. So anyway, so now what he does here, so he goes to the Neshama. So he says, Kumei Kain, the Chenu Gamba Neshama Kumei Lamata. It's also like the Neshama, the way it's Lamata. But Teva Ha'aliyah V'Skalos Lamaila. You see, Tanya Pedig Yutes is so fundamentally, it keeps referring to. Kumei Shekosu B'Sefer Shalbein Pedig Yutes, the Chefza, the Cheshko B'Tiva Lifre, the Lotzeis Min HaGuf. Like he says in Pedig Yutes, that its desire and its pleasure, and by nature, is to separate and leave for the body. This is the Lashon Tanya. The lidbag b'sharsha mekeda b'Hashem chaya chayim baruch hu. And to cleave to the source and root. The root and source in God, who's the source of all life. So basically what he's using the Lashon Tanya, you see, is what he said before about Oyed. Remember we said Oyed, its Teva is Aliyah V'Skalos. This is the Tanya. And earlier, he referred to the Pedig Yutes, different ways. That it wants to do it, it's only a desire to do it, then it's only like a flame. And then here he said in the last Pedig, what we just said, the Yeshlemer, 2 levels of Chochmah. Okay. Hagam Shetiyah Sham Ayin Beis. Even though there, the Neshama will be Ayin Beis. There'll be nothing there. Why would something that has a Metzias and a being, why would it want to go to a place where it completely that's obliterated?
Because that's what the desire is.
So why does it want to be there? Because its nature is Ayin. If it was a Yesh, it wouldn't want. The wick is not interested in rising. The Meir is interested in rising because that's what its nature is. Its nature is to be a channel, an extension. Its personality is all extension of its source. So it wants to go into that source and remain there. Even though it becomes Ayin Be'efes, that becomes more of itself. The 2 levels we spoke before. Either because it's restless and doesn't find its place, or because Be'etzem. I mentioned in Chelik Vav, the Kutas Sichas, and another Sichas that Rabbi brings, Teirek Yutes, 2 ways to understand it. Is it the Teva of Eir? Is it Mitzad? Eir becomes more Eir? Or is it because Eir by nature is Hepech Mitzias? Similar to these 2 things. One is because it's becoming more of itself. Not Yesh. More of itself is Bittul. And and the other part is that it has nothing to do with itself. It's all it is the source.
Very much what we just spoke about.
Yeah. I want to look there. It doesn't say into this. But Chelik Vov, there was no Ayin Beis yet, so they didn't have it. But we later wrote it in another Sikha. I think we didn't get this. It's very similar to these 2 interpretations. But now comes the other side of the coin. Nevertheless, it comes down into and lahoyer to radiate the animal soul.
Illuminate.
What?
Illuminate.
Okay. For who ayideha achiza shel nefesh habamis. So he says the same lotion he said before. Nechaz, the kelim are nechaz. It's idea achiza. In other words, it's not like sunlight. Sunlight shines down on earth. It's not nechaz in what it shines. That's why the Chassidus says it can shine in a garbage pile like it shines in a palace. And the Shama, however, it's nechaz. It is
Selective?
not selective. It's grasped. It's contained by the kelim. It's affected by them. Nechaz. How would you translate nechaz? Literally means to grasp, but the nechaz is more achiza. Something has achiza. It's like a flame. Sometimes it says the kohen lights the flame and doesn't catch, and then when it does catch, achiza means a flame is actually, the wick is actually burning. It's not just the sun is like shining on the earth. It's
Holding
actually,
on to it.
Yeah, it's holding on. It's containable. It's pnimi. It's more pnimi than makif. That's really what it comes down to.
Defined by the Caleb.
Part of it. The hari tachlis hakavona. Why is this? Because the purpose is biridus and sham matu ragdol de loher snev shabam selachis. Because the purpose of the soul coming down is only to radiate, to illuminate the nefesh habamis, the animal soul, and to give it life, to sustain it. And nefesh habamis has to be a keli muchen, a ready, tailored container to receive this energy of the nefesh halikis and to live through it. And if it wasn't a container to receive the air of the nefesh halikis, then the air would not radiate, would not shine, would not illuminate there.
To be a keli is the same as the lubricant. We always learned that
The chlal, the beginning of Ayin Beis, the whole point is Eris and Kelim is Islapshus. Makif, Rotzen is not Islapshus. Air and Kelim generally is Islapshus. That doesn't mean, like we just learned, there's a level of the air that's not completely manifest, that remains above the Kelim. And there's a level of air that's like the Etzim, air that's completely higher. But generally speaking, obviously he's talking here how the airs are coming into the Kelim. It's similar to like the air from the soul, as it goes from, into the first the keiches haklulin, and then the power of vision goes into your eye, the power of hearing goes into your ear. That's the big part of what he speaks. It's air pnimi. Air pnimi fundamentally has to have air and keli that are tailored for each other. Like Chassidus says, let's say living in a house, your house is not really a keli for you. Your garment is a makif harochik. Your garments are more makif hakorib. They're still also, but your skeleton and the keiches pnimim, meaning, or food, you ingest food. That's already an example of, Muslim levush bayis, the three necessities. So Muslim actually enters inside of you. Or if you put it in the nefesh, everything is relative, but for example, your skeleton and your skin are part of who you are. Where your clothing you can take off and on. Your home is definitely, from a home you can't tell who's living there. A garment you can at least tell the size of the person. But the keiches are mamish pnimi. These are just examples, but that's what it comes down to.
You mean that a particular neshama comes into a particular body? The body is designed for that neshama. Is that what?
I was saying more than that. I was saying that in the soul and the body itself, there's the physical faculties, the eye, the ears, the nose, the mouth, the brain, the hands, the arms and legs, and everything. Everything is a container for that particular energy, and it's actually. This is the whole Hemshech in the beginning, from pages and pages, it discusses this.
In other words,
that's not the theme right here, huh?
The physical body is missing a limb, is missing a hand or a foot. That part of the corresponding component of the neshama is missing, or it's just
no, it's not missing. It just has nowhere to express itself.
So where does it
it returns to its source. It's like in its source. It's like an energy has no place to rest.
In its source out of the body, or it's in
in the neshama, in the nefesh. No. That's why it says Chassidus brings that blind parents can give will give birth to a seeing child because the nefesh has the keich hadiyah. Yeah. Look, also another thing. Let's say you do have the limb, but the limb is, let's say, weak. That's why he says in the beginning of the Hemshech, the limb is weak, so it doesn't allow the flow come in. If you have, let's say, you block, God forbid, there's a blockage, so the flow can affect a pinched nerve or something like that. So there's different ways how the energy can be compromised. Basically, the keli and the air are fitting each other perfectly, and they both need each other. And then he says here, actually, how each one has to be ready for the other. They both are prepared. So now, what does he do? He continues this chapter here, all about Nidus and Neshama Lamata, right?
Yep.
He's speaking of Veda, what he spoke till now about Eir and Keli? About Eiris?
Yep.
Okay, so okay, so even though, I'm sorry, when Nefesh Habamis is not a container for Nefesh Habamis, that's when you say Nefesh Habamis is in a form of exile, golus, and concealed. This is a shtickle parenthesis. How long does it go?
Go ahead, don't top.
Okay. So all this is just to explain. I'm just going to sum it up. We can just go back to where we are. Okay. Then he starts explaining how the whole idea of that's what means. You want to sum it up? Remind me. Tefillah is what Nefesh Elokis does when it illuminates and radiates in the Nefesh Habamis and affects bittul in it. Okay.
Oh, wait, the tefillah becomes
So here's basically Eidus and Kalim. You'd say is Nefesh Elikis and Nefesh Habamis.
Yes.
Right.
He's a little muscle.
Okay. So what's say it b'kitzur, if you don't mind.
The top part is talking about the
rest of the chapter here.
He's talking about the carbon, the Nefesh Elikis is Makav Nefesh Bahamas. That whole in the Kudah, and it's Mila the early key.
No, I'm saying both of them.
Then he went to Asog, and then he went to we had this problem at the bottom. It wasn't a problem necessarily. About Chochem, the Yedi, and Chochem, and how to Chochem.
I know, but the Nekuda here is what?
What's the good? Because how the Erev Nefesh Elikis is Mila the Erev Nefesh Bahamas is Meluvish in the Nefesh Bahamas. Nefesh Bahamas has to be a Keli for that Erev. It has to be Nechazin, it has to be a proper Keli for it. Then it takes Nefesh Bahamas as a Makravit. And that's the need of Tefillah.
Okay, so bottom line is that for the Nefesh Elikis, which is the Eir, even though it's nature, for it to be able to influence the Nefesh Habamis, which is the Keli here, the Guf Nefesh Habamis, you have to have achshara, you have to prepare, so there has to be a bittul of the Kelim, in this case, that's what Tefillah does, Kevid Reish is the Shvira, Klolis, how it subjugates and it, what's the word for it, harnesses the Nefesh Habamis, that's Tshuva Tata, and that allows the Nefesh Elikis to radiate and to illuminate inside of the Nefesh Habamis during davening. And to be Mekarev, right? To Mekarev, to bring the Nefesh Habamis closer to Elikus. So what's happening here is the Nefesh Elikis comes down, right? From its natural place. So when the container is ready, the energy can enter into it. One second. The same thing he compared it. Okay, so Nefesh Elikis has to come down, the Nefesh Habamis has to be ready to receive it. And I'm just going to conclude. At the end of the page, he says like this. I'll read it. I'll read it fast. The same thing is with the individual faculties, the nefesh. Like even though it's a bechinas keich levad, even though it's only a keich, it's not eir in the full sense of the word. It is keduchinas hanefesh. It's similar to the spirit of the nefesh, the spirituality of the nefesh. By nature, the keich haseichel say, he calls it the keich here. Teva aliyah keich hamaskil. He wants to go back into the source of seichel, which is keich hamaskil, the root of seichel, which is ayin mamish. That's higher than actually conceiving of ideas and wisdom. But only because of the container called the brain, when they are mukhshar and mukhan, when they are prepared, mukhan and mukhsharim, they are ready and prepared to receive tzuras. The chemer is ready for the tzura. The container is ready for the form. Is ready for the function. So even though the Eira Seichel on its own is completely mushal, it's completely
out of the question.
Right, it's out of the question. It's completely the word oblivious. It doesn't relate to the whole idea. Actually, opposite of relate. It's whatever. It types mushal out of the question.
Different to the whole idea.
More than
Exclude?
Opposes. Abgefrekt.
That's abgefrekt, yeah.
It's abgefrekt. It completely opposes the whole thing of being a yesh metzias. Why? Because it's ayin be'etzem, and its nature b'liyis b'tiva elu nichol b'mkeir b'chinas keich hamaskil chiyuli shebe'etzem and never ma'achas shemeir misham. And because it comes from the source, the root of all seichel, the keich hamaskil, that's where it wants to be. Raksibas hamshach chasei. So what's the cause for it to come down, to draw down? Yiridasein, reading, l'isachas u'lishleis b'meich, hubam etzad b'chinas chemer kli hameich kashet Huchan v'tev l'kabel yamshik v'yagbil le'er ha'seichel. It's because of the physical, the material container of the brain. When it's well prepared to receive, it will draw down and will contain, it will define the Eir HaSeichel within it, and turn it into Bechinis Metzias and Yesh to understand.
It grabs a piece of Seichel and there's more Seichel flying around in the Chapsach. That's Nechas.
It doesn't get it.
It has a kavanah.
Well, let's put it this way: it does something to enough to get it into its clutches. V'nasa kamei nivdal mina etzem shalei, and to the extent that it does it in a way that that the Eir, even though by nature it belongs in the source, like we learned, it becomes kamei nivdal mina etzem. It's like separate from the source. Because in the source is ayin v'skalos. The fact that it's thinking is made it. The fact that it's even thinking, it means it's got nivdal mina etzem.
What's the why is it called the Seichel in the first place? If it's when it's not
No, pre
going to the
So this look in the beginning of the Hemshech. So it talks about the Eir Seichel because it's Eir Primi ultimately. It is a defined Eir. Look, there's a lot of levels here. The Keli really makes the real definition, but even before it comes into the Keli, even the Eir has Chachma. It says that later. It says that earlier. It's not. We're not talking about Eir Makif here.
Right.
That's another question. Could you contain it? Eir Makif is not affected by Keli. I told you, Eir HaShemesh doesn't matter whether you prepare the ground. The sun is not going to shine better there.
So it's an Eir Primi that if it wouldn't have the Kli Muksha to be Meluvishin, it would remain an Eir Primi that's Muvshit from the Keli.
That's what he says. Yeah. So it's Ki'ilin. You know, when you read this, it's sad. It's sad. You know, the Eir is like it's like the sadness of the neshama coming down the mata. It's like mamish. Its nature is completely being in the source, and here the kelim are causing it.
Yeah, I'm putting your speakerphone.
Has to bend down to the.
Who's it?
He just wants to listen.
Kamoi Kain b'chinas Eir l'mayla shebetzma b'chinas alivus. Or Kamoi Kain, the same thing is with the Eir l'mayla. So far, just to give it context, the whole Maimer before was talking about Eir in its abstract concept of Eir and Keli. Here he brought it now into Neshama and Guf, or Neshama Guf and Nefesh Habamis. Now he brings it also in Keiches. So he's applying it to reality now. And now he's bringing Vizeo. Now he says, "Kamei Kain b'chinas Eir l'mayla," and this is the same thing as now Eir l'mayla. He's summing up what tying it all together. Eir l'mayla she'etzem hu b'chinas aliyah v'yiskalos b'mekede she'be'etzem Eir l'mayla that we spoke about in the previous Maimer, the Devarim Maimer, Tziyun, the Mishpat, the Poda, is be'etzem. It's aliyah v'yiskalos b'mekede. Remember, he said all levels of Eir. Eir wants to go into its makir. Because that's Eir is by nature ayin. It doesn't belong here. It doesn't feel it belongs in the source. It's a level of ayin. But he doesn't call it like hostage, but nechas, it's grasped, it's grabbed by the keli. The keli grabs it. So let's think of it, visualize. Here you have a flame and a wick. You study it. If the wick was not some way holding the flame down, the flame would expire. So the wick is nechaz, it's nechaz. The Eir is nechaz in the wick. So it's simply and the keli is yeshem mitzias. Therefore, the keli affects the Eir to also become a yeshem mitzias. Nivdal mina etzem. So what you're doing basically is, it's important here. That's the energy and light never loses its personality of reaching upward. You see that? Because if you, for example, God forbid, if you extinguish the flame, or more importantly, if the wick or the oil, like we see sometimes, is too powerful, the flame goes out. So that's not a flame. The flame, as long as it's a flame, is constantly reaching upwards. You can't change that. You turn the flame over, it's going to go up again. There's no way to stop that. But the wick is making the flame do something opposite its nature, to be grounded, to not disappear. On its own, it would be completely expires. The neshama would not stay in the body. Now he's not saying here what forces it to do. That's what we're going to learn. What really, why is the keli so powerful that it can do that? But the bottom line is it's doing it, And as it does it makes the air to do something like, it looks like it's nivdal menatzim. So when you look at a flame, if someone didn't know this, they say, you know what? Flame is also a yesh. The wick is a yesh like this, and the flame is a yesh that rises. That's not the case. The flame is really doing something that's not its personality. So let's not convince ourselves, in other words. So the neshama, when it's in the guf, it's against its nature. Al korcha chatachai. It's always restless because it doesn't feel it belongs here. So the restlessness in the human spirit is coming from an air that does not feel. It's grounded by the body and nefesh habamis. But this is the Harib Chinusayin. Actually, v'zeu she'er ha'chochma b'yeshi b'kleli dafka nikra chochma b'hei. B'chinas yesh v'dover. Okay, he's using chochma with the hay at the end of chochma.
Is that what it means, the hay or ha'chochma? We're trying to figure that out.
No, he would have said ha'chochma.
But look what he says further.
One second, because who being the chochma? One second, who being the chochma shemischakim b'klei meich ha'chochma. So chochma, no, he's basically saying chochma with the hay. For who? There's Rudover. Who? Being the chochma shemischakim b'klei meich. That he uses mischakim, he thinks of ideas. Because remember, he said before that it wouldn't be chachma if there was no keli. It would go back to the keich hamaskil. So the fact that keli is what makes it into yezru dover, that mischakim with a container of meich chachma. 1 second. Aval kedim sheshayre b'keli and nikra b'shem chachma behei.
What's it called? Chacham?
It's a problem because he says with the gam shem ater the chacham shayach lakim shalbes b'keli chachma meishes boy. I have to look it up. What?
Hagvura, Hakteferes, Hanetzach.
I don't think so. No. Where do you get that? It doesn't say it.
It says, "V'chein bina behay or habina b'chimer habina b'chein gedula gvura."
No, but bina is also, but bina with a hay at the end. He means bina at the end.
What's without a hay at the end? Bin?
You have to look up the source where he's bringing this from. He says, "K'moshe is boy." I'd have to look it up. What's up? B'chein meich habina, b'chein gedula gvura. They're all of them with a hay at the end. He's not saying, I don't think so. Once a chesed gvura shebekli halev, that's chesed gvura that's inside the container of the heart. Dafke or kahai gavim b'chol asasvirish kashen eres bekelim b'zeh shekosher chochma meicha. I have to look that up. This is you have to look it up where it says this.
We didn't even look it up. It doesn't even look for it.
I think we didn't understand it last week. Why should we understand it now?
No, I'll explain it next time.
Where would you even look for it? So I'm just curious. I'm not gonna. Where would you even look something like this up?
Where do you look up anything?
How do you look? Usually there's a marker. It says Ayin this or look at this.
Either so I know a few places in Teirei and Likutei Teirei that discuss it. My own knowledge. There's a thing called that's on the Sichos. But they were talking about the example. There's the Sefer Likutim is a great place to begin.
Okay.
And then there's the Mafteches, the Rebbe's indexes on Likutei Teirei. This I know what to look. And also you see K'moshe's boy. It says he explains it later. It's definitely from a place. It's not just his own thing. Okay. So Perek Reish Pei Daled now.
Did we finish Reish Pei Daled?
You did. He told me you finished.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sure I'll just read the Kitzur. And nevertheless, the air comes down, is drawn down, and becomes a mitzias. So two things: it's both drawn down and becomes a mitzias. But who idea keli? The keli is what draws it down and makes it a mitzias. The neshama, whose nature is to go upward, and it comes downward to radiate and illuminate the nefesh habamis. Who idea have a chonus on nefesh habamis, and that's through the preparation of the animal soul. That's the keved reish, which is the bittul, the kabbalah cell. So a shvira klolis, keved reish, your head is heavy. It means that it's a type of bittul to the breaking of the general shvira, the general shattering of the nefesh habamis. V'hu inyan hashuva tata. By dezeh, through that, meir by a nefesh alikis, the nefesh alikis shines through it. But tefillah during daven, lachesel lekarev b'chinas avel alakus. To sustain it and to draw it closer to loving godliness. And the nefesh alikis, in doing so, goes down. It's a descent from its aveda, how it is above. In Perek Tanya, in Perek Lamed Zayin, he says And no matter how it's even a tzaddik, no matter how high his Aveda is down here, his high Aveda would be higher without his body in heaven. Gan Eden. The Chemba Keiches, and then he concludes with the Keiches, same as with the faculties, Keicha Seichel Be'etzem Ayin V'B'Teva Aliyah. The Keicha Seichel on its own, Be'etzem is fundamentally Ayin, nothing, meaning nothing of substance, and its nature is to go upward, to ascend. And when the mind, the container of the mind is prepared, it's not prepared, it doesn't work. Is ready and muchan and Muzuman, Muchan, there's a word for that I want to say.
You know when he's prepared?
That's when the seichel, which on its own goes upward, descends and manifests in the mind. And the seichel, even the era seichel, the checha seichel becomes a mitzias that's separate from the etzem. He said,
not the what you talked about before, where the mitzias it's not altered, it's not anything.
Well, he's going to talk about that. What happens to that part of the era when it goes into the.
But over here, using terminology, mitzias becomes a mitzias.
So he says kamoy before he said kamoy shenivdol. Also kamoy nivdol, nas kamoy nivdol, from ayin. Now Perek Reish Pei Daled. In Mashnas Barley, I'll read it. She'ez v'akelim Beis Chavchim betachlis. We understand from what he said before, it's moving that the Eres v'akelim are two opposites. They're two diametric opposites. Betachlis. She'ez b'chin Ayin Be'etzem shu me'ein Mekede. Because Eres by its own nature is Ayin Be'etzem me'ein Mekede. Here he's going to explain in this chapter. How is it possible that these two come together? They're opposites. How could two opposites come together? And it's ayin and it goes elevates over to its source. You see how important that is? Because if you could argue, if you had not kept emphasizing this, you could say, you know what? It's not opposites. The two higher levels in air, that may be opposite to Keli, but the air that comes in the Keli doesn't retain that personality. That's why it's so important to say it's an opposite. Because back to the interface, even in the keli, retains the element of it wanting to leave, and without the keli, it would leave, even the lowest level. So it's still there, like he says. Kanal pei dekreish beis. The Ayin Beis, the Ayin Beis again. So it's a very deep level of ayin, very Beis. What do we say? I would say amplified. Ayin Beis. Ayin Beis.
It's now Ayin Beis when it's in the Kli, or wants to be.
He said it before too in the Ayin Beis.
He wants to be. Before he said he wanted to be Ayin Beis. Here now it's in the Kli, Ayin Beis.
Where was the Lashon Ayin Beis? He said it before here in the kitchen.
Much easier.
In context of Eliya's context.
Oh, you want to get Friday? That's why you're getting excited. Spoke about Friday. Yeah, big time. It's the relationships.
Yeah, it wants to go even more ayin when it goes into the source. It wants to be even more ayin.
But it sounds like now,
I just told my cousin
The Russian Friedman had a whole.
Yeah, you could say that. You could say that.
That's what.
Okay. But Keli, on the other hand, the extreme diametric opposites are Keli. Time to blow. But Keli, on the other hand, the Keli, on the other hand, is an etzem b'husa. Yeah, he does say that. You could say because it desires. Remember, he said b'makom should say shalom. So you could say because he desires, that's why he's there. So you could say that even when it's in the Keli, since it desires to go up. Maybe that's what he means. Look, it's all levels. Before in the Kitchen, he did say that the air is ayin and it wants to go to Ayin Beis. Here he's saying that the air is Ayin Beis itself. Okay, because he wants to emphasize the opposite. Remember, the bottom line is the lowest level of air has the highest level of air in it, and that's a diametric opposite to Keli, which is yesh be'etzem uhusa. So really, Perek Reish Pei Gimel it was not really a new additions to the whole ideas of ayin. It was really more applying it to neshama and to keiches, and beginning to show how it interacts with the keli. Here in this Perek Reish Pei Daled, remember this whole sugi goes like this. The sugi began here
Three Madrigas in there.
Not here. Chapter Reish Ayin Tez, the whole thing, Eir and Keli are two opposites. Remember, Ayin Beis Chavchem B'Tachlis L'Yis Yidua, Eir is Ayin, Keli is Yesh. That was chapter 279. The whole extension of Arichas, the whole Maimer, all the way through chapter 282, was about all these levels of Ayin. 283, he went into the Eir now has to come down into the Keli, and the Keli affects it to come down into it. We see it in the Neshama and Guf and Nefesh Habamis, and we see it in the Klei HaSeichel. Now he's like bringing it back together. So these are now two opposites. Everything we discussed, the Ayin, Oyer is Ayin, Keli is Yesh. And the question is, how do two opposites come together? Interface time. Okay. So it says, yeah.
Don't we learn that the Keli of a higher level becomes the ore of a lower level?
Oh, that's another problem.
No, it's sort of it.
Yes.
And I'll throw in another 20 questions if you like. Don't we learn that Kelim B'chlal are also Elokus?
Oh, right.
So what's it? So they're both. So that was it semantics. So semantics. Eir, Kelim. They're both Eir. One is called Keli. One is called Eir.
That's what he's saying, yeah.
Okay. And then we learn that Eined Mavadi and everything is Atzmus. So B'chlal there's no Eiris and Kelim.
And then we learn that.
It's a continuum.
Okay. So what's the answer to all these questions? First of all, the answer is we just had a whole Fabrengen on Thursday night that we have to be listening and not
So
processing.
I've been doing it for 22 minutes.
It's not as easy
You
to
give
say,
us
but-
22 minutes, we'll give you the word.
By the way, it's not as easy as you said.
I didn't say it's easy. I said it's easy.
No, but you said it's very doable if you just do it right.
Easy and doable are not exactly the same thing. You could do it, you have to want to do it, and you have to have a reason to do it. Like the air, you can't be b'shashvus with yourself if you want to get it. One second. So first of all, you can't have all chassidus on one page. Everything in this place. The first thing is you have to dissect the pieces. Obviously, in the source, Eir and Keli are just two manifestations of divine. One, you could say Eir HaBligvul, Eir HaGvul. But even Keli, you could begin as being really an Eir. Or sometimes it's expressed even more deeper. It's God's power to transmit and God's power to withhold. That becomes the root of the Keli. So it's all, of course, everything is Havayu Hu Elokim. Everything is God, but it's two manifestations. And above all, it starts with the fact that the Eibishter wanted a world of diversity. If he wanted a world of Achdus, we wouldn't have anything. We just have Achdus. So when the Chassidus speaks about the Tzimtzum concealing, it conceals parts of the Bligvul so the Gvul can emerge. And that's where the Kelim begin to emerge. Then you have Ak, where there's no Kelim. Then you have Akudim, with one Kelim. And Akudim, 10 Kelim. And in Tikkun, the scholars. So there's a whole bunch of levels here. Then the Kelim of Atzilus, compared to Biyah, are Eir. So of course everything is, but so it's all okay. So it's not a question; it's just a matter of understanding. At the end of the day, remember this is a big map here. On Earth, a Eir and a Keli is the liquid, is the Eir here and the Keli. But you could even say the liquid is a Keli to the atoms that are inside the liquid. I mean, everything is Eir and Keli when you really break it down. But you have to start with someone just saying in general things are this. Form and function. Chaimer and Suda.
I just wanted to get permission from you to think about this, that's all.
100%. Sometimes Levushim are called Kalim.
Right.
Sometimes Kalim are called, and this is, by the way, it's not defense of Umeret only, it really is different dimensions of it. And the fact is, Chassidus even says, what for you may be a Eir, for someone who has a deeper understanding would be a Keli. What you're getting to Eir is for another person, is a Keli.
What is Malchus? Atzilus or Bria?
That's right, exactly.
But at the same time,
Okay, so there are two opposites here.
but they're opposites.
Bottom line is they're opposites
Yes.
in our world.
The teachers had us read through the Senate, because it was, even though we only got the kids, or,
Okay, so bottom line is, I'm just showing how this is tying, this is not separate, this is tying together a whole discussion here. This discussion of Ayin and Yesh. We now explain in Pei Gimel that they interact. Now we're going to explain how they interact. And that's going to lead us into a whole explanation, just to give you the flow here. He's going to explain that the Eir has to be receptive to the Keli, and the Keli has to be receptive to the Eir. They both have the interface, they both have with each other. Then it's going to become a whole discussion, the next Reish Pei, how in Keli Gufa there's Pnimis HaKelim and Chitzenius HaKelim. And the Pnimis of the Keli that's receptive to the Chitzenius HaEir. And then the question is going to happen, what happens if Chitzenius HaKelim interact with Pnimis HaEir? What happens if Chitzenius HaKelim interact with Chitzenius HaEir? Understand? There's all kinds of, exactly. And that's where Toyu goes. Toyu is going to make a reappearance soon.
That's when you go for marriage counseling.
Yeah. Right.
That's when you need a marriage counseling?
Huh? But they say the difference between a war and an engagement and a war, right?
A what?
They ask, what's the difference between engagement and war?
Yeah.
They say the war is after the marriage. Okay. But then after war comes harmony. Let's not forget that.
Or you obliterate the enemy, one or the other.
Right. So anyway, so Shari Kol Inyan Atzilus, Hakeli Hulias Bechinas HaMetzias. No, Shari Kol Inyan Atzilus Hakeli Hulias Bechinas HaMetzias. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The whole Inyan of Atzilus Hakeli.
Don't make me Atzilus.
Yeah, Atzilus Hakeli. But it's not Atzilus. The whole idea of the imparting of a Keli is to be a Metzias. So Mishum Zen Netzola, again Netzola. Me'ein say Baruch Hu Shlei, it's all about Atzilus here, not Nivra. Just in case you're wondering, even the Keli, even the Yesh here is still Netzola. That's why Netzola would be imparted from. Bria mean created. Netzla mean Yetzel Ruach min Hashem, min Yetzel Hashem, what was Yetzel Ruach min Meshach on this game?
Ruach Asher Alecha v'samti aleha. Ruach Asher Alecha v'samti aleha.
The Yetzel means to impart, meaning it's not a new creation. I'm taking a part of you and I'm imparting it, sharing it with someone else. So this talks, that's Atzilus. And that's why, because this whole thing is Metzias, that's why it's imparted from divine, from the infinite divine light, not in the Bechinas Dveikus B'Mkede. We learned that before. That even though Shiesh is also comes from Elikus, and it's also in Tanya and Shayich U'Amunah, it's whole Metzias Elikus, and that, he's broken that Peidik Reish Ein Tes. But nevertheless, it comes in the form of Dveikus built in the Keres. It's not Dovuk, it's not bound. It's not Shalei B'chinas Dveikus B'Mkede. So it's imparted from the divine, but not in a way that is clinging to it in a revealed way. It's not consciously aware of its source. But if they liyas b'chinas Metzias David, in order for it to be a separate Metzias, a Metzias, not a separate, a Metzias, to be a entity, v'ub'chinas ha'chochma v'abina v'chesed. And that's the levels of chochma, bina, chesed. So zeh b'chinas ha'keli dav b'chinas Metzias David. All this is the level of the container, which is a Metzias David. Now let's define again. All it is a channel for something beyond itself. Keli is a Metzias. Not say yesh, but a Metzias. It's just a Metzias. And the Keli affected, we learned in the last chapter, the Eir to become also a Metzias. Opposite of its nature. And this is the root from which we'll create and shape Chacham Bina of Biyah, lower than Atzilus, Bridi Tziyasiyah, who connected the Chol Yin Esesfiris Atzilus will anhaga bahon olma. As it's known that all the point of the Esesfiris Atzilus is to rule, to govern the worlds. What are the worlds? Bridi Tziyasiyah. So this is a very fundamental just statement here. It's just summing up Eid and Keli. Eid is Ayin, Keli is Metzias, and this is the root of all the Metzias that will come afterwards. So all existence, the structure of existence is rooted in the Kelim of Atzilus. Because from Eid and Sefat Atzmus, from the essence of the divine light is not shaykh. It's completely not relevant, not relative, and not related to existence. So from there cannot be the Isavus, the creation of the worlds. It has to be Ki'im only Aydem Tzoyes Esesphiris, only through the intermediary interface of the 10 spheres, the Atzilus, Shenesavam Eidin Sof Aydei Tzimtzum Arishin Shayib Eidin Sefer. And these 10 spheres themselves emerged and became created through the Tzimtzum addition that concealed the divine light. So the divine light alone from the Etzem wouldn't allow room for any type of structure, any defined structure. Where does it come from? The Esesphiris. The Esesphiris themselves had to emerge after the Tzimtzum. So basically, you have the divine light doesn't leave room for everything. A tzimtzum conceals that, allows for the spheres of Atzilus to rule and govern and create existence as we know it. But the ikir of Atzilus is not the air that creates structure. The ikir of structure, the ikir, the primary force that creates structure of existence, are the kelim, the containers, because they're mitzias davar. In other words, take away the containers, areas of Atzilus, yes, would be much more defined and limited compared to air lifnei tzimtzum, but it wouldn't be structure as we would know it. It would still be amorphous. It would still be too abstract. So it's the kelim that actually gives substance to the structure. And from this comes the Chachma Bina of Biyah. And even though Chachma Bina of Biyah are infinitely apart from Chachma Bina Datzilus, so you just said it came from there. It's infinitely apart. Not just the Eris of Chachma Bina and Datzilus, but it's infinitely apart. Chachma Bina be even Gabi the Kalim of Chachma Bina. Nevertheless, because at the end of the day, ultimately, even in Atzilus, the Kalim of the Chacham Bina are Metzias. That's the point. So if there was only Ayir.
The word you said then about the Meshkigurare, numbers.
Yeah.
This is it.
On one level, yeah. So upon him, so what Atzilus accomplishes is that it gives the Kalim of Atzilus, gives substance, give mitzias, give definition. So even though technically the definition of Chachma Bina and Atzilus is infinitely different than the definition of Chachma Bina in our world.
That's in the nisht. Oh, but in the yeah.
Right. But at the end of the day, like he says earlier in the Maimonim, he says that Chachma of Atzilus is not Bina Datzilus.
Right.
And Bina is not Das.
Exactly.
Das is not Chesed.
Exactly.
So there is that similarity. The similarity is in the structure. That there is 10, and not 9, and not 11. So there's a structure. But don't ever think that the divine supernal man, Tselem Elokim, that we're created, is yeah. Maybe like Yossi.
Ah.
I told you one day they're going to dig up the fossils of these videos. Say, who's this Yossi? Who's this
Lang?
So someone say, must be a caveman. You know? Okay, so that's from so it's beautiful here. It goes like this. Eid Sof has no shape and form and nothing. Okay. Not even talking about built-in Metzias, so we're talking about Metzias.
Right.
Tzimtzum conceals that intensity.
So that's what it is.
Then you have energy, but the containers are critical because the containers create substance. Because if you only have air, air's nature is to go back to the source. So if you had that, just practically speaking, if you think of the imagery, if the tzimtzum happened and only air remained, the air would run away, would leave town. It's we're right back before the tzimtzum. Tzimtzum had tzimtzum ahin. I'm not going down. Go right back home. So the kalim create that grounding. It's the wick. The wick is there to keep things. That's the rishima. That's why after the tzimtzum.
Oh, sorry.
Moti.
Shaking things up a little bit.
I thought there was an ayin here. When there's an ayin, you don't feel its presence.
You wouldn't have felt the camera moved if there was an eye.
So that's what the kalim do. They create the grounding. Fine.
It all goes back to Metzias, built Metzias.
Right.
It all goes back to that.
The
Chelik HaMetzias.
The classic da posach Eliyahu vayera, like it says in Teira da posach Eliyahu al derech hamazl hamake ve'emer gadol. So it says there, it says in Medrash that every grass, there's no ace of besoda, there's no blade of grass that doesn't have a mazl amayel that says grow. So it's in other words, basically he's saying that the Chachma Bina of Biyah, who's telling it to grow, is Chachma Bina of Atzilus. So there may be the grass and the mazel are shalei berech. The mazel is a ruchnisdik thing. Grass is grass. but still, it's dictating what should be down here. So in other words, there's the engine room. Atzilus is the engine room. The engine room doesn't look like anything that we can understand. But it like I remember sitting once with Shalom Bepevzin, all of Shalom, so he says to me, he was working in printing with Matel Chaim, Empire Press then. Ashver also was involved, so he says to me, that's when they started, it was called cold type computers, word processing. And they would use linotype. Linotype was physically you typed and engraved in the lead letters, and that's how that was called typeface. That's why it was called typesetting. They set type, physical type. I remember I used to go with my father in the Tagmon Journal. So then the computers started coming out, and of course cheaper and easier and less mistakes and not so dirty and all that. So he says to me, I will never buy this. So I said, why not? He says, was tut's innovating? He wants to know what's going on inside. He says, what's a menschele? There's a menschele that you type, and the menschele gives you back a letter.
Like a person inside the radio.
He says, you can a menschele? He doesn't see how a menschele could fit in there. He just would not relate to the idea that you can type a letter, and a letter comes out without some engraving going on. Like, here you type a linotype, you type, it engraves in the letter, so it stands at the machine. So I said, she says, good. It's taking the thing, the machine makes it amplifies that even though you press a little, it's like electro typewriter type of thing. But he doesn't understand how could it's completely different mohus. I couldn't explain to him. I said, I don't know exactly. Then I tell you the truth, when I finished with him, I felt confused too. But I know it works, who cares? Bottom line is it's true. You press an AB, there's no AB inside. It's translating it into digital language, electric impulses. That
Plus and minus.
And someone wrote a program that looks like an A. So when you press A, there's an impulse that turns. So you have to understand Ayin and Yesh and so on in a different way. By him, he knew Yesh me Yesh.
He doesn't understand interfaces.
I'm sure he would have if he, but he was used to that. And it was like he says, I will never trust something.
By the way, we don't understand it either. We just accept it.
That's right. That's right. Exactly.
Some people only trust computers, not humans. He only trusted humans. Yeah. So bottom line is that it's shalei berech. So when you press, my point was you press a letter, it's not like a typewriter you actually press and you see a key hit the paper and make a letter A. It is, but it's different shalei berech, but it's still affecting it. Just using it as an example. So today we can relate to these things. Like, when someone sees DNA or a cell, a human cell, or a microscopic particle, no way you would be able to ever conclude that that's going to create objects as we know it. If you were able to go there and look at it, you wouldn't know. We go backwards and we relate to it and we see existence, and it's made up of pieces. But those pieces, the building blocks and what we see, are not even close to each other. But that's the etzem of us, that energy. So bottom line is that shlei berech, but it is nevertheless, it's what gives it to shape and form. So essentially, Atzilus is like the archetype, the quintessential root on an energy level of structure as we know it. But it doesn't have any shape and form as we know it. Even though it's called Chachma, it's Chachma b'lo Chachma Yediyah, like that type of thing. Now, obviously, and Atzilus.
That's Mitzias built to Mitzias Nimtz. Chachma b'lo Chachma Yediyah.
Atzilus is genug. Does Misfilim Mitzias Nimtz is also pretty far.
No, but it's the same idea. Good.
Okay. Yeah, everything's microcosm, macrocosm.
Hatu chakim v'lo Chachma Yediyah.
100%.
Yeah, but you see, without Atzilus, you can't get to Atzmus. Okay, so there's the interface on many levels here. Yeah.
The way computers work is more like the way Hashem made the world than the way a typewriter works.
Absolutely. God spoke and created a physical thing. How's that? It's not yesh me yesh. On the other hand, he said Yehi Oyir. The words Yehi Oyir and you have Oyir. That's the similarity. But the words of God, Oyir, Asar Mamoris, or it's Eses Sfiris, Chesed, Oyir, doesn't look like Oyir that we know it. But without it, there's no Oyir.
Still, it's Oyir.
Right, because he didn't say Rekia.
Right.
Exactly.
You say Yekreach.
Well, Tanya brings the example of words and letters. The words and letters that come out of our mouth are far, far distant cry from a far cry from the physical reality. But it's the beginning of it. It's defining it. That's the reason that the Kalim were created b'chinas Metzias. That's why the Kalim were Metzias, because without that Metzias, there would have been no Metzias as we know it. V'gam shehem b'chinas Yerida v'amshacha. And Kalim are not just structure, he's adding another point, they're also Yerida v'amshacha. They also are descent and a drawing down. Very important point. It's not just definition, it's structure. It's also is both two things. It's not defined and not structured, and it's also constantly reaching its expiring, transcending. Obviously, Haba Hatalia, they're interdependent, because this is not connected to its source. That's why it could have definition and structure. The since it's connected to its source, is overcome by its source and cannot have so much definition and structure. Yes.
No, see, the Kalim are more like the source, so it doesn't be connected.
Like the Etzem, maybe.
The Kalim is more like the Etzem.
Yeah. Well, it depends what part of the... But that's the problem. If you only have Kalim, you would stay where you are.
The fact is the Kalim doesn't only retain the air, it also draws the air.
Yeah. But that's
strange, right? When you draw blood, I mean, it's a vacuum in it, it's a Kalim, but it pulls it.
Absolutely. He said that in the last chapter, that it's Nimshach Nechaz. It draws it, absolutely. That's why, when they says earlier in the Hemshech, right in the beginning, when the Keli is more refined, you eat proper foods, when you do right things, the more it will draw. The more it will draw, yeah. Okay. But here comes the big question. If that's the case,
we haven't touched upon this. What is the force that draws it? What is the
later?
The whole Hemshech. It's ultimately the Kavana and the Kelim have a Shadish Hamokir. You know, I mean, it's a whole bunch of things.
The Shabbos feels that the dinner.
Yeah, but let's learn it inside. He's going to say, now that we established that Eid and Keli are opposite, diametric opposites, one is Ayin. One is Metzias, Metzias. Once they didn't say the word Yesh, he only said Metzias, right?
Correct.
Okay.
I noticed that before.
Yeah. Im Keli even Klal. Eichis Chabra Edim HaKeli. So how do they join? How do they fuse? How do they get bound? The two opposites. After, since they are diametric opposites, they are opposites of each other. We said Heper Betachlis. In the first line, Avchim Betachlis. It's like we said earlier before, the spirit of man rises upward. The Ruach HaBehem, the spirit of the animal, goes downward and going in two different directions. He's climbing the ladder, this one's going down the ladder. Just in case you wanted the connection, that's Ma'aban. Question is so Ma'aban, remember Ma is Bittul of Atzilus, and Ban was
Ma connected with Ban. Is that the question?
How do they combine the two? That's opposites. Ma and Ban. It's almost like Teyu and Tikkun. And we see that they don't just get along. They actually get bound and united tremendously, intensely. In a energy and a life force that's internalized, penetrates, permeates the Keli. So let's say the sun and earth. The sun and earth, you could say, the light of the sun, you could ask the question, how does the light of the sun come down to earth? Fine. But it doesn't bind itself with the earth. As I said before, there's no the Keli doesn't change the energy. The sun will shine anywhere equally, garbage or a beautiful place. It makes no difference if you make something more container, more refined. It's not going to create more sunlight. You know, just for the right. I mean, you could create. Of course, you could have a garden that you plant it right, and it'll absorb the sunlight. It'll grow. But that's not because there's more sunlight there. That's because you did what you had to do. So the light doesn't change. Here it's not that way. Here it's nischaber yet misachid mamish, which makes the question much stronger. The air is in the psila. The flame is in the psila. This fuel, this wick, is actually burning. So if it was just more like, like a visitor, like just passing through, it's one thing. It's actually being bound with the keli. So you have two opposites. So how is it combining?
It's not totally two opposites. I mean, they're both divine. Right? I mean,
Yeah, but this
keep
one,
on going back and back.
there was 100 pages to let you know that they were opposites.
Imagine that Rebbe Rashab was sitting here and said this. That's what you would say? You think he didn't know that before you?
No, I gave you 100 pages.
You probably heard it from him.
That's why he didn't say
Keep in mind.
No, but that's why he didn't say it.
Keep in
Of
mind.
He
course.
didn't say it 100 pages ago, he said it now.
Yeah.
After we established that they're opposites.
And the bathroom tile is really divinity too.
No, but if you really learn this, it is opposites. Because the fact of the matter, energy, let's be specific. Light and energy by nature leaves. What makes the flame stay by the... Why Taka doesn't the flame expire from the wick? What's keeping it there? That's the question. What's the keeping it there when its nature is not to be there? We're talking not from the nature point of view. Obviously, you can command it. See, he's not. His answer is not going to be that God commanded it. He's going to explain how the air can ultimately communicate. Because remember, we're talking about an interface here. We're not talking about imposing on the air to do something. So that's here. It's not just because that's the pastor's answer is God commanded it, and that's it. You like it or not. That's anyway. This is the whole point here. The body mamish lives from the nefesh. Like I said, it's not just passing through. It's not just a garment. You put on a garment, a clean body can put on a dirty garment. You can put on a garment that's not fitting even. Here, it's not that way. They fit. They're like a perfect fit. Neshama and a guf. And God forbid, if you're unhealthy, that's when there's no fit. If there's a healthy person, the body and the soul are like.
The goof needs in the neshama, and the neshama also needs the goof, same way.
Sure, but he's not there yet. Yeah. Well, for the purpose of existence. Yeah.
Cheskel, come down. He's Kaylee.
It says lots of love and Hashem is going to go today.
Yeah.
Where does it say that?
Ranat and Samavov and Ayin Beis.
It's not a niggle anymore. It's not.
No, it's a Chiddush concept. It says it in Kabbalah. They gave it to Sefer Gover,
Yeah,
Eishes
but
Chayla.
it doesn't say these words.
Which
The
guy?
Shom's Guf is from Tzidus.
So Eishes Chayil.
Ranat
It's from Ranat.
and Ayin Beis. It's also from Alter Rebbe. Alter Rebbe
It
is
doesn't appear.
What? Neshama and Guf?
and Shom is Zunis min HaGuf.
What does that mean?
That the neshama will be sustained through the body when Mashiach comes. But he's not there yet. One second, we're not there yet. The levush should actually melubish by davar chai. A levush, a garment, would be that only dresses up a davar chai. Mashenkin beguv nefesh. Hari nefesh mislabish mamish misachel be'ad shaguf atzmi chai memeno. When guf nefesh is not just a garment. The garment that you wear doesn't become alive. In the body becomes alive. The body is a functioning body that's alive. Even though the neshama is not the thing that gives the body substance, but once the slapses of it, it manifests in a way that the body itself becomes alive. The classic example would be if I took a stone now and I threw it, the stone is flying. Even if you never saw a stone fly, would you call the stone now a flying stone? The stone assumed the quality of flying? No. Your koyach was strong enough to defy its nature of being grounded, of gravity, and causing it to fly for the amount of strength you have. And then once the strength is gone, the stone will fall. The body, chai neses atzmi, the Gemara says. The body, chai neses atzmi was a geit halacha. That a live person carries himself. That's why you don't chal, for example, what's in the gate? It's a Shabbos. Carrying a person.
You can
That
carry
can't carry
it.
that person.
Huh?
You can't carry that person.
Right.
It's not kindness, it's not, but a live person. A live person.
Yeah, that's right.
Because chai neses atzmi. So bottom line is something that is alive, it permeates in a way that the thing itself becomes a living entity. During that time, and of course, as he explains in the beginning of the Hemshech, the slapshus. The air hariyah goes into the eye, the power of vision goes into the eye, the power of hearing into the ears.